the next objective is to create the template mesh. So our first objective in Maya is to create a template humanoid mesh for both male and female models. The purpose of the template is to become a primitive that we can import each time we need a humanoid, so that we don't have to start at the beginning every time we have to create a character. We can begin this process making a male character and then modify the contours and, if needed, edge loops to create the template mesh for a female. We will refer to a variety of anatomy references to create this base mesh. It's important that we choose a simple, clear reference as a model sheet to regularly refer to in Maya. This will give us a regular check-in point to ensure that we're on task. And I found something perfect for this job. So do you recall what I said about intellectual property earlier? About asking for permission and all that? Well, I've been scouring the web, looking for something better than the standard anatomical reference that I've used in the past. Okay, so for example, this is what I've used in the past. And if I zoom in on that, this is usually what I get to see, what I'm staring at inside Maya. It's just very low res. It makes it very hard to teach with. I can model with this kind of reference, although I don't like it, but I can do it. I have experience with modeling, so I can figure it out, and I have experience with anatomy, but you don't, or you have very little. And in my experience as a teacher, having students follow me along, this is a problem. So I want to do away with this reference. This reference came from the Anatomy for Artists book by Sarah Simblett, and none of the drawings match up, so there's actually two other views. There's also the side view and the back view. And I think the side view is male, and then the front view is female, and the difference is in the hips. And so it just makes everything difficult, and the face doesn't match up either. And it's not symmetrical in the drawing. Okay, so those are the problems with that drawing. Enter this guy. I don't know who he is. He's just some guy on DeviantArt who is annoyed with the same things that I've been annoyed with, except he took the time to make it. And his only requirement is, he says here, I hate small res pictures and the ones with the watermarks. I agree wholeheartedly. So enjoy, and if you find it useful, leave a comment. What? That's your only requirement for this 7,000 pixel image that's been exactly laid out for me? Perfect. So here's my comment. So very useful. Thank you very much. Submit my comment. Beautiful. And there's a big download button right here to get the high-res one, and I already downloaded it. And I'll just pull it into Photoshop and take a look at how awesomely high-res this thing is. It's brilliant. So this is going to be nice, very nice. In fact, you can see he even has the leg facing us, and then the cutaway of the leg on the inside facing us. That's just lovely to be able to see all of those shapes. And then the arm with the arm, and then without the arm, and we can just mix and match these. The only thing that I don't like about this reference, and it's not that big of a deal, is that the arms are down. I like that the hands are out, and I really like that the hands are facing me, but the arms are down. I would like to have some room in the armpits, but I have not found anything this good yet. This is definitely the best thing that I have found. Look, full skeleton. Absolutely wonderful. So I'll live with the armpit problem and go with this. And the legs could be a little further apart too, but I can always adjust that too. So we're not going to follow it like a map, but we can definitely keep to this, and it will make teaching the process and you following along even easier. So I'll include that, and I'll include the link to that in the training. So this guy, what is his name? Eli Tass SJ4 at deviantart.com. .deviantart.com. Next, we want to prepare and import the reference into Maya, and there's 3 ways to use the reference in Maya. The first is to use an image plane object. Most people know about that one. The second is to use a polygon plane with an applied material and image map. That's the old way of doing it. And the third is to simply import a reference sheet into the image viewer. So just having images floating around and looking at it. Let's take a look at how each one works. And before we do this, I want to ensure that the reference is level and prepped for each orthogonal view. All right, so we're here in Photoshop, double checking the reference to make sure everything is lined up. So I'm just going to zoom in here and pull a guide off of the ruler there and drop this towards the top of the head. And it seems to be very close. I would say the tips of the fingers and the very top of the head. Just the back view just seems a little bit off on the top of the head and the tips of the fingers, but everything else seems good. I've already gone over this a couple times. The deltoid, the collarbone, the elbow, they all look really, really good. Far better than the references that I've been using in the past. So now everything is leveled out, and we know that it's very, very close to leveled out. So the next thing for me to do is to split each chunk, each view, not chunk, but each view into its own file. And one of my primary concerns from past experience is whether or not the back and front, if you laid them on top of each other, do they align? So they're level horizontally in almost every place, with some very small variation at fingertips and at the top of the head and probably the toes. But do they align when you put their spine on top of spine and head on top of head? So let's try that. So to do that, I'm going to marquee this back view, the whole thing, and Control J to make a copy onto another layer, Control A to select all, and then V, and then just click and drag, and notice how it automatically marquees that piece. I'm going to drag that piece over top of the other one, let it snap to the guides, reduce the opacity to about 50 or so %. Let's zoom into the head, and then use your arrow keys to nudge it, just left and right, up and down, and just nudge it until that cranium lines up, and then that's pretty much perfect right there. And then walk your way down looking at the shoulders. The shoulders look good, elbows look good, arms and hips look good, wrist a little bit off, thumb a little bit off, fingers a little bit off, but I think that's because the hand is not straight down. You notice how it's kind of bent to the side a little bit. Perhaps that's the problem, or maybe this is just a different illustration. Yeah, no, I was right. See how the hand is coming forward just a little bit. So it's going to be just a little bit off. Now, I think that this is acceptable here in this area, and certainly I think it's acceptable where we're just a bit off here on the knee and on the side of the leg. I'll focus my efforts on one side of the body. So each leg being perfect isn't a problem. I can actually focus my efforts on maybe the left-hand side, since it seems like that's aligned very well. The hands, well, I'm just going to fill in the gaps. I'm going to look at anatomical reference and fill in whatever this can't give me. I mean, this reference has given me a lot that I can practically I can almost trace it. Almost. Although it's not really tracing. But it does guide me along very, very well. And whatever doesn't match up, I'll fill in the gaps. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to leave that layer right where it is, since it's lined up. And that's very important to me right now. So I'm going to deselect my marquee, Control D, and continue the process of separating the front and back now that I have them on top of each other. Okay, perfect. So let's hide that back view layer. Hide that for now. Go select the original layer again. Marquee the front view. according to the guides that I have right here in front of me. And, oops. Hold shift to add to the marquee. There we go. Marquee that whole piece, snap to the guides, and control J. Okay, go ahead, hide that one. Unhide the back view that we just made and repeat that again, following the exact same guides. This way it ensures that both of them are, in fact, the same size. So let's do that. Okay, so you can see there's just a hair, just a little bit of pixel that was trimmed when I did that a second time on the left and on the right. And that's great. That's great. I want both of these back and front views to be the same dimensions, height and width. So let's keep this visible layer and delete the former layer. So now I've got a front and a back. If I adjust transparency here, they're right on top of each other. And that's more or less how I'm going to switch it inside Maya. And depending on which method I use, whether it's the image planes or the polygon meshes. Okay, let's continue separating the other pieces. And same thing, I want to ensure that both side views stack on each other and have the same dimension. So I'm going to go through the same process with that one. Like I said, same process for the profile views. Putting it on a new layer, selecting all, translate it, drag it over top of the other one, reduce transparency, or opacity, excuse me, nudge it until it aligns. Double check the alignment. They should be perfect. Yep, absolutely perfect. Now use these guides to marquee and isolate both side views. Deselect the marquee, reselect the marquee inside these guides. Control J, and delete the former layer. Same thing on the original layer. Control J, and then just confirm adjusting the opacity. Absolutely great. With both of these stacked on top of each other, adjusting the opacity in Maya, we can turn the arm on, turn the arm off. Arm on, arm off. Perfect. While we're at it, let's isolate that leg, the inside leg. Make sure you're on the original layer. Select all, V, translate it, change the opacity. Very good, very close. Good enough for me. That's very close. Deselect the marquee, reselect the marquee between the same two guides for the same dimensions. Control J again. Delete the bad layer. Bring the opacity back up. Now we've got a leg on the inside, same dimensions as the other profiles. Hiding the original layer should show two views, a back view and one of the profile views. And I have all of those layers visible. So from this point, I'm going to do a process of separating each one into their unique individual files so that I can then bring those back into Maya. So I'm going to choose to duplicate the entire image, the entire file, and hide any parts I don't want to see. So we're just looking at the back view. Choose Trim, which will remove all the transparent pixels. And we can remove all of the layers we're not using and also remove the guides. And then this is our individual back view for use in Maya. We'll save this as a JPEG. It's high enough resolution that I think JPEG compression won't be a problem. Let's make a new folder for this. I'm going to call this my template references. And this is my back view. Save this JPEG, go ahead, save it, and do a maximum quality so we get the best out of it. Let's repeat that process. We can close this one, and no, you don't have to save it. Let's duplicate again and repeat this process for the other 4 layers. Yeah, I thought there was a feature for this. I couldn't find it earlier. It's right here, this little button on the side. I want to delete hidden layers. You could just delete all the hidden ones all at once. So that's easy. Okay, I have each view saved. I'm going to confirm. So here in my source images folder of my project directory, I have my back, front, inside leg side, side no arm, and the side with the arm. Each one is the same dimension. It looks like my side view is just a little bit of the leg is just a little bit smaller. And also the front view is just a little bit of the back view is just a little bit shorter than the front view. And that could have been just a simple mistake in the marquee. I'm going to fix that. So it's a mystery why they were a little bit of a different dimension, but I think I know what it was. It's because I was trimming. So there could have been an ever so small amount of transparent pixels on the top and the bottom that would have trimmed the height of the front view, and also for one of the legs, the width-wise. So instead of trimming, what I'm going to do is duplicate the image. That step's still the same, except this time I'm going to marquee between the guides, ensuring that they snap between those guides, and I'm going to crop it. And that would be up here, crop. And so this marquee is the same, this crop is the same for the back and front view. So that's a simple matter. Let's delete the unused layers. Or, I'm sorry, let's delete the hidden layers. Okay, so now I've got front and back view, full transparency. And then I'll just export them as JPEGs with each layer visible one at a time. That's easy enough. And let's go through the process of doing save as. So that's still the same. So just a little bit of a different process, but this should guarantee they're the same dimension. Yeah, and that did the trick. So just double checking to make sure they're the same dimension. It says down here it's 1053 by 2300, and the front view is exactly the same dimension. So I'm going to repeat that process for the profile views. And just to make it clear, I'll record it for you. So again, it's duplicate the original file. And then we're going to, in this version, we're going to marquee the profile view between the guides. So this marquee will be exactly the same. We're going to crop it. Okay, and then let's let's see here. Yeah, these 3 layers are the layers I want. Yeah, and then we can delete the other layers and save each one out as JPEG, and we can overwrite the other file. So this is the profile with no arm, so that one, and just overwrite the same file, maximum quality, and repeat that for each visible layer. And that did the trick. All side views are exactly the same dimension, and we know they're lined up because we aligned them up in Photoshop. So fantastic. These are ready to go into Maya. So here we are in Maya. Now I expect that you have already some experience minimally, at least with the Introduction to 3D Modeling course that I have offered before and as offered as training. But I'll go over a couple of basics. So first of all, make sure your project directory is set. That's a very important element. So I'm going to make sure that my most recent project is set. And if you don't have a project, be sure to go to Project Window, click New, give your project a name, and then pick a location to save it, and then hit Accept, and that will create the project directory. And it should load every single time you launch Maya 2015, which is another point. I'm inside Maya 2015. And I also have preferences for my Maya 2015 available on my website. Let's go to File, New Scene, Option Box. And the item in here that I want you to pay attention to is the linear unit centimeters. It should almost always be set to centimeters. And what this says is that 1 Maya unit equals 1 centimeter. And you could switch it to the other measurements. 1 Maya unit would equal 1 inch, 1 meter, so on. I don't recommend switching it to other measurements, other scales, because all the major softwares are set to centimeter. In the rare case you need standard measurement, I would choose inch. Unless you have an incredibly large scene, in the rare case where you need to use meter or yard, I would stick with centimeter or inch. Okay, so centimeter it is. The same place you can find that is settings and preferences, settings, and this is the global. These are the global settings right here. So you can make sure every new scene gets these settings. Okay. Next, let's look at the display grid option box. So 1 unit in Maya is 1 centimeter. We've got that clear. But the way in which they calculate that here in the grid options is a little confusing. What they do is they say, show me a grid line every 5 units. So every 5 centimeters. That's how you can read that. Show me a grid unit every 5 centimeters. Let's change the color of it so we can see that. And hit apply. So that's the actual grid line. So every 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we see a grid line. And what they do is they divide it 5 times. So we see 1 centimeter for every grid block. Alright, that's just confusing. So let's make this really, and then they set it up to 12. I don't know why 12, but it's 12. 10 makes more sense because we're working with metric. So let's hit apply. And that all that does is it clips the grid, the display grid, only in the perspective view. This number only affects the perspective view. Let's change the grid lines to be 1 for now, just so it's easy to understand. Okay, so now what we're seeing is for every 1 gray block, that is a centimeter. The light gray is a centimeter. And then we could divide it 10 times. Now we're seeing the millimeters. Fantastic. So if you really need to be as tiny as millimeters in measuring something, use this setup. So what we're going to do, by the way, this is crowded. This is really crowded. Let's hit apply. If we go to the perspective, orthogonal view, and we zoom out, there's a limit to how much can be displayed. Okay, so there it goes. It popped. It just goes away. So there's a limit to how much of this grid can be displayed. All right, so we're going to discover that that's a problem when working at large scales. So what we're going to do, now that we understand grid lines every X centimeters, so I can say, show me a grid line every 5 centimeters and divide it one time. Okay, so now we're only seeing the gray block, or in this case the origin. The black line is the origin. So when we switch to an orthogonal view, now we just see gray blocks. So that's every block is 5 centimeters. And then let's show the numbers on the sides and hit apply. So now it counts for us as we zoom out, and we don't have to keep track of that. So we can just say, okay, I'm 55 centimeters tall, something like that. Okay, so this is what we're going to use in assisting us in creating our figure and making sure our figure is a life scale. Which brings me to one last point about the scale of the scene. All of our tools, such as, say, bevels, are set to a scale. So like the width parameter here, it's set to a scale that accommodates the miniature scale of modeling in Maya. So most things are modeled right here on this grid, right? No bigger than this. And the default grid is 12 units. And most people model things within those 12 units. So that means everything is really, really, really tiny in comparison to the real world. And all of the numbers, such as bevels, such as merging components, and so on, are relative to that scale. So if we choose to scale on life-size numbers, if we bring a 6'1" character, that's 185 centimeters tall. That's 185 Maya units. That's a big object in Maya. It may be in our best interest to model at a relatively small, or like quarter size or eighth of a size. Then once we're complete, we can scale it up to life size. It all depends on the projects, and of course which game engine you're exporting to, which other software you're exporting to, or if you're trying to sell a model on TurboSquid, where it has to be life size scale when you sell something on that website. Okay, so just some thoughts about units and measurement that I think are very important to our next step. All right, so let's talk about the real-time rendering. This is going to be an issue when we're working with textures in the viewport. I can use Viewport 2.0, my video card supports it, and if you enable this, Maya should tell you whether or not you can't use it. So if you can't use it, it should give you a red flag. If for some reason you can't use it, you'll have to use one of the two legacy views. I would recommend using the legacy default viewport. And when you use that one, just be sure to go to your settings and preferences underneath display and make sure that this max texture display resolution is at this number of 4096. It should be. And then fast interaction can be turned off. If you're using Viewport 2.0 and you're able to, you should. And switch the rendering engine to DirectX 11. And this might not be available until you turn on the plugin. So you have to go to your Settings Preferences Plugin Manager. And right in here, right there, DirectX Shader, make sure it's loaded, auto-loaded. And then that becomes available as the shader. So if you go to your Viewport 2.0 option box, it will now refer, all of these settings will refer to that DirectX 11 shader. And that can be found in the Hypershade. That's a different story, a different day. But having that turned on, if you can, Viewport 2.0, it's really, really great. If you can't, use the legacy default viewport. The Legacy high resolution viewport was just something separate where it allowed you to bake textures to see higher resolution textures in the viewport. Hopefully you won't have to use that one. So viewport 2.0 it is. Okay, let's import our first reference to the front viewport. That's the bottom left pane, and I'm in the 4 views preset. So the bottom left pane, and image plane, import image. Get the front view, choose it, open. Now, in the attribute editor, we have several things that we can do to edit this, and these are designed specifically for handling reference. So, what we can do here in this first option is disable seeing it in any other viewport. So we can force it to only be visible in the front viewport. That's useful. Let's just leave it off for the moment. The gain, we can darken the image. I find this to be very useful. It's easier to see the wireframes of my mesh with this darkened. So I'll choose one of these darker grays. The alpha is very, very useful. We can animate or change that to suit our needs to see through the reference. For now, we'll leave it at 1.0. Scrolling down. Coverage X and Y is the maximum resolution of my reference. So the slider's always all the way over to the right. That's the maximum resolution. And notice that when I adjust that, how it affects the texture. The image center we're going to leave at 0, 0, but not on the z-axis. I want to push it back a little bit. Notice how we can't see the grid lines. Just select the little corner there to reselect the image object. You could also select the image object in the outliner image viewer. I'm sorry, image plane. Enter a negative number, negative 0.1, and that will just push it back a little bit so that we can see the grid lines on top of. And I think any small negative number, if I said negative 0.01, would be enough to see it. To see the grid lines on top of that. In past discussions, I have taught you to use the image center to adjust the position of the object. I'm not going to do that this time. This time I'm going to use the transform node. But I'm not going to transform this one just yet. I want to bring in the back view as well. So let's import the back view. Under the view menu, image plane, import image, choose the back view, and it will come in at exactly the same location. We can double check that it's in the same location with the same coverage and also the same width and height. We want to make sure the width and height are exactly the same numbers. So we made sure everything was exactly the same in Photoshop. We want to make sure everything is exactly the same here. I want it to also have a negative number so that on the z-axis so that the grid can be seen on top of the reference. But I don't want to use the same number, so I'm just going to push it back a little bit further. So 0.02 or 0.03. 0.02 should be fine. Negative 0.02 on the z-axis. Alright, and let's reduce the gain. Oops, I just pushed the wrong one back. Got it. There we go. Now we did it right. Notice we can see the front view on top now because we pushed the other one back a little further. Okay, so in the perspective view, we have front on the positive Z side. So this is the positive Z side running this way. And we flip to the other side, we've got the back on the negative Z side. Front and back. It's convenient to see front and back when flipping in the viewports, or when flipping from front view and then switching to back view. That's very convenient there as well. So I could just flip front, focus here on the face, flip back, focus on the back of the head. So that's nice to have both references visible at the same time. but sometimes you might want to focus just on one of the references and hide the other one. And why would you do this? Because we might want to have the images slightly transparent. So I mentioned earlier that we can adjust the alpha. Let's switch to the front. I mentioned that we can adjust the alpha. So if we reduce that alpha, we start seeing the back image through that. Okay. So what I want to do is keyframe the visibility of one or the other so that sometimes I can see both of them, sometimes I can see the front, and sometimes I can see the back. And when I look at just the front, it'll be a little bit transparent, and when I can see just the back, it'll be a little bit transparent. So we're going to do this with the time slider. We're going to keyframe it. I'll begin by changing the frame range to about 6 frames. So that way I can just click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And the first frame is going to be everything's visible and everything's opaque. Okay, second frame is going to be that the front view is visible, so we'll keyframe that. Front view is visible. Back view is invisible, so we'll just enter 0 and then keyframe that. Okay, double checking that. Front view, both are visible. Oh, see, it's a good thing I double checked it. Make sure they're both keyframed as on at frame 1. Okay, so now we can see both. Very good. And at frame 2, I only see front. And I want the alpha to be just a little bit less, maybe 0.75. So that's a little bit see-through. And we'll keyframe that. And at frame 1, make sure it's a value of 1 and keyframe that. So here, full opaque. Here, partially transparent and front only. And then at frame 3, we'll set the visibility to be off for the front view. Set the key. Set the visibility to be on. Set the key. And alpha can be 0.75 at frame 3. Make sure it's 1.0 at frame 1. So, double checking everything. Frame 1, I see both front and back fully opaque. At frame 2, I see front slightly transparent. And at frame 3, I see back view slightly transparent. Easy enough. So then, depending on which one I want, I just switch to that frame. And then eventually we'll have a frame where we can hide them all. Or we can put them on a layer, which ultimately I think I'll just put them on a layer. It's easy to manage them that way. Let's continue importing the side views. So we'll switch to the right-hand view, image plane, import image. Let's start with the side no arm. Open. Let's reduce the gain. And push it back, this time on the x-axis, negative 0.01, so that we can see the grid on top. I'd like the character facing positive x. I'd like him pointing in this direction. So I'm going to invert the z-axis. Sorry, apparently that's the x-axis. There we go. So flipping the x-axis of the image plane and turning them the other direction. And we can freeze that transformation. So this now says 1.0. Where he currently is good. I like that his spine is more or less centered, so part of the spine's in front of the center, in front of the in front of Z0, and part of it's behind Z0, and the neck is near Z0. It's okay to position this maybe where the ear hole, you could use the ear hole as a guide. If you really want a set rule, you could use the ear hole as a guide. But I think where he currently is okay. And we have other adjustments to make, but we'll get to them. Let's import the next side view. Okay, this time I'm going to pick the side view with the arm. So I've imported it into the wrong viewport, and so now it's locked into this perspective view like a kind of rotoscope, and that's not what I wanted. So I will delete that. Apparently I can't see it in my list here, but it's a shape of the perspective node. I can see it here. It's called image plane shape 2. So I'm going to select the image plane in the viewport, go to my hypergraph connections, and delete the image plane shape for the perspective camera. That gets rid of it. Just in case that happens to you, you know how to get rid of it. Okay, let's switch back to the right-hand view. Import. Do it again. Okay, great. Same thing, same gain, same invert. So we're going to invert it on the x-axis, -1, and we're going to push it back on the x-axis inside the image plane shape, -0.01. I'm going to put it on the same location, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then we're going to make sure that we freeze the transformations so that scale is not -1. And repeat this process again for the third profile image. Okay, I have all 3 side images in. I've renamed them so that I know which one is which. I have freeze the transformations of each one, so they're all pointing, and they're all pointing on the positive z-axis. And each one has the same color gain of gray, dark gray, and the image center is all the same, -0.01. So now I'm going to go through using my timeline here to keyframe which one I want to see, and so on. You know, for some reason the freezing transformations doesn't want to freeze these objects, so I'm not going to make a big deal about it, and you shouldn't either. So let's focus on visibility. Okay, so the image plane side and inner leg, the one that actually shows the arm, I want those to be invisible at frame 1. So I'm going to key that. So when looking at the model, I see the side profile without the arm, because a lot of the work that I'm going to do in the beginning is head and torso. Then I'm going to work on arms. So a big chunk of my work is right down here without the arm. So that's fitting, that works. So frame 1, opaque. So at frame 2, I want this side view to be a little bit transparent. So let's keyframe alpha. Let's also keyframe visibility at frame 1 to be on. Keyframe alpha to be 1.0 at frame 1. At frame 2, alpha will be 0.75. And keyframe that one. So now when looking at the front view, side view at this slight transparency at frame 2, that would make it much easier to see the mesh through the references if I need to. At frame 3, same view, and again, alpha gain, keyframe that 0.75. So I have the same profile on the back view. Okay, frame 4, we're going to hide this side view, and we're going to show the one with the arm and key that. Okay, so it's hidden, and then it's visible. And here, just as a matter of simplicity, we'll keep the gain, alpha gain, at 0.75 and key that. And at frame 1, so at frame 4 we can see the one with the side arm. Let's switch to the side view. And it has a slight transparency to it. So when we bring an object into the scene, we can see the object through the reference just ever so slightly where it's clipping. And that's why we do the alpha gain. Sorry I didn't make that clear earlier. Continuing to frame 5, alpha gain for the side view is 0.75. Visibility is on. And now what I want to do is switch the back view. So back view can be off and key that. Front view can be on and key that one. So now at frame 4 we should see the side view with the arm, back view at frame 4. At frame 5 we should see side view with the arm, front view. It looks like we're going to need a 7th frame, so let's change this to 7. So at frame 6, we'll leave front view where it is, and it can be on. Side view will be off. Key it. Inner leg will be on. Key that one. And alpha gain will be 0.75. Key that. Frame 7, front will be off. Key it. And the back will be on. Double checking everything. So frame 6, I should only be able to see side view with leg, inner leg, and front view. Frame 7, I should be able to see back view with inner leg. I don't really think I'm going to need these combinations, number 6 and number 7, but I thought I'd just finish it off for us. So at frame 1 is the one I'm going to use a lot. Frame 2 and frame 3 are the ones I'm going to use a lot. So we're not quite ready to model yet. We still need to tweak a few things. So here in the outliner, let's get this camera out of the way. Just middle click, drag and drop that out of the way. Grab all... Oh, and I just caught something here. My inner leg is visible at frame 1, so be sure to turn that off at frame 1. Yeah, that's better. So at frame 1, I should only be able to see front, back, and side with no arm. At frame 2, front and side, no arm. And frame 3, back and side, no arm. So those are the 3 I'm going to use the most. Okay, like I was saying, so you've got, select all of them, and at frame 1, and group it. Okay, and just give this group a name. Okay, it's my reference group. Select all of them again, not the group, all of the references again, and place them onto a display layer. Hit that little icon with the blue ball, double click the layer, and give this a name. And then go ahead and click Save for that. So now you can hide and show references, all of them all at once, very easily with this. And you can also set it to template or to reference so that they can't be selected in the viewport. That's handy too. For now, I want to select them. Okay, back to the reference group, select that. Negative, not that. Select the front and back view. Select those two. All right, notice that the skull is a little off. All right, something we didn't anticipate because we didn't stack the profile views on top of the front and back views in Photoshop. So now we're discovering here in Photoshop, in Maya, that there's a little bit of an offset. Not too big of a deal. We just want to translate their y-axis position. So don't grab the gizmo. Just select front and back. Zoom in real close. Highlight to translate y in the channel box. Turn off this gizmo. Turn this little thing to a piece of pie. And then middle click drag in the viewport to animate that value until that skull lines up. Perfect, just like that. So my value was negative 0.08 on the y-axis if you just want to punch it in. Okay, let's look at the feet. The feet are probably a problem. They're looking pretty good. Pretty good. Feet look good. All right. Switch to the front view. Now select the reference group, which is this one. Hold down D on your keyboard, which enables you to edit the pivot point. And then you can barely see it, but click just the y-axis and drag it straight down. Right onto that ground line. Okay, right onto that ground line. Now, hold X. This is with the group selected. Hold X on your keyboard and snap it to the origin. Okay, now it's on the ground. Wait, where'd you go? There it is. See, now it's on the ground. And notice, okay, just a little bit of toe under the ground on the side view, little bit of toe above the ground on the front view. No problem. Not a big deal. I like where it is. Okay. Notice we've got a translate value here in the translate y-axis. Let's freeze the transformations for the group, which will automatically freeze all the children below. At least I think it will. It should. Freeze transformations, translate, rotate, scale. Yes. So let's freeze transformations. Of course, that was kind of stupid because No, that wasn't stupid. I never animated the transformations. Yeah, you never want to freeze transformations when you animate, after animating transformations, but I never did animate the transformations. Awesome. So, my character is on the ground, meaning his feet stand on Y0. I can see opaque back, front, and side at frame 1. Frame 2 and frame 3 are my primary concerns. Awesome. My scale is a little short. My guy is about 22 centimeters tall. So he's a miniature. Oh, yeah, and there's one other thing we need to balance. Check this out. It's not quite right on the center line. See that? So this black line is the origin, is X0, but his head's not quite there. How did that happen? So we'll take both front and back, select again the X, translate X in the channel box. Again, I'm going to use my middle click and center it on that line on the nose right there. Pretty close, maybe not quite that line, somewhere until it just feels like it's the right amount on each side. And if you want to measure, do a little measuring, you can either use the measure tool or you could just bring a cube into the scene. Right on the center. Hit number 4 to see wireframe. And then just increase the values of that box. And as you increase the values, just watch both left and right and see, are we hitting each side evenly? Pretty close. Let's adjust that just a little bit more. The head really is the most important in terms of being centered, because we're going to start there and then we're going to work our way down. And then, excuse me, and then we're primarily just going to focus on one side of the body. I think we saw earlier in Photoshop that it was the right-hand side leg. Oops, the right-hand side leg that's a little off. So if you want some solid numbers, it looks like I adjusted this 0.07 on Translate X. If you've been following me exactly, that'll work. Okay, so let's review. His feet are on the ground. He's got a simple hierarchy for moving the reference, that's nice, and for scaling the reference. The front and back view are centered on X0, starting head going down to toe. We have our primary views at frames 1, 2, and 3. We know that the scale of this object is 22 centimeters tall. and I'm trying to decide if I want to go a little bit bigger with him. So if this is a standard 6-foot character, 6'1", that's about 185 centimeters. So if we go to quarter scale, it'd be slightly more than 46 centimeters. So let's bring them to about 46. We'll go to quarter scale. So we'll switch to the front view, select my reference group, zoom out until I can see about 45, 46, and then I'm going to hit scale, and from the center, scale it up until the top of it, not the reference, but the top of his head is approximately 46. And that's close. That's close enough. And that's a decent scale. So we're at quarter scale of total height. And don't forget to save your scene. And I'm going to call this scene template references. I'm sorry, template mesh. Template mesh male. We'll make the boy first. So for the purposes of getting started, we're ready to go. There were two other ways of importing reference into Maya, and the third way is very, very easy. Let me show that one to you, which is to simply import a reference sheet into an image viewer. The image viewer is right here. This is your render button. I guess it's called render view. And go to File, Open for that, and then pick the reference that you'd like to load into it. So just go to my source images and pick the reference. So I've loaded the full 7,000 pixel image in here, and you can navigate this just like you would a viewport, zooming in, zooming out, and so forth. So you could just place all of your anatomical references into this window, and then just pan and zoom around and look at the sections that you want to look at. You can even dock it into a view. So if I switch this to 2 view, you can go to Panels, Panel, and pick the render view. And now you've got your reference sitting here in a neighboring view. So you can just pan around, look at the different items that you'd like to focus on, and that's pretty easy. You could have the panel floating around too. You could tear it off. Where's the tear off? Yeah, you could tear it off and switch it back to the other one. Pretty simple. The second way that I mentioned is to use a polygon plane with an applied material and an image map. So this is the older way of doing it. So I'm going to go through just one setup of one image plane, and then you can, following what you've just watched, apply the same concepts to this one. And the only advantages to this method that I can see from my seat right now is that I can control the wireframe display over top of the grid, so I can use that as kind of a leveling guide, and I can control the kind of material that's used on the image plane, on the polygon mesh. So back in Maya, I'm going to add a polygon mesh and apply a material to it. You have a couple of options. You can either use a material like Lambert that has a flat value, a flat shade, but it will still have, no specular highlight, but it will be like an eggshell appearance. Or you can go with Surface Shader, which is just pure color. So for now, I'm going to grab Surface Shader. It'll make it pretty easy because I have very few parameters. The output color is a texture, so click the checkermark icon, File, then choose the image name folder, click the folder icon, and pick the file to work with. Let's choose the front view again. And it's a texture, so you have to hit number 6 on your keyboard to see the texture in the viewport. And inside Surface Shader, click this top icon to jump to the image plane. And what we want to do is jump over here to Place 2D Texture and change the coverage on the surface. We want to change that number. So you got to kind of wiggle Translate in Frame set that back to 0, and then you can actually animate and see the change of coverage. So you can see it's distorted when it's set to full coverage. So we want to adjust those proportions. So how do we know what this number is? Because Maya doesn't give me an easy make this a proportional based on the heights and width of my reference. There's no button to do that, at least none that I'm aware of. So we break out the calculator and look at the resolution of the image. So it says here that the resolution is 1053 by 2300. So it's easy math to figure out whatever this coverage number is going to be, because this is a 1.0 value. That's a 100% number, a percentage, scalar value. We're just going to take 1053 and divide it by 2300, and that number is the one you want to use, 0.4578. 0.4578. And that's the exact proportions of the model. Now it's not filling the entire grid, that's fine. And I want to cut it on the edge here so that I don't need all these polygons, those are useless. So what I want to do is move this edge. All right, now I can't just select this edge and move it. If I do that, it distorts the texture. All right, that's the way UVs work. But there is a parameter inside the tool settings for the Move tool called Preserve UVs. Checkmark that. With that checked, it will keep the UVs where they are and allow you to adjust the topology ever so slightly with minimal damage. And now I can switch to polygons, turn the preserve off. Now I can switch to polygons, marquee the parts I don't want, and simply delete it. And so there's my image plane. We're not quite done yet, but that's the start of it. Then I want to bring the center back to center. So I'm going to go up here to Modify and choose Center Pivot. And then I want that center to read. Let's go back to the transform node. Where's the transform node? There it is. I want the center to read 0, 0, 0 when it sits at the origin, not where it is. So I'm going to hold X, snap it back to the origin. Now it says something entirely different on the x-axis, and then be sure to freeze the translation. Let's come up here, freeze transformation, and now it says 0, 0, 0, and it is at the origin. And my pivots should all be 0, 0, 0. Yeah, so all my pivots are 0 as well. So now I can rotate this on the x-axis, 90 degrees, to have it face forward. And now that one is close to ready. You might want to remove the edges altogether, because you can control how it's cut up by inserting edge loops. So you might want to go through and remove, and I'm just holding Shift and double clicking, and then hit Control Delete, and you might want to remove edges like that. So now you only have the horizontal ones. And then you can either turn Preserve UVs on and adjust where these are, or you could simply delete them, and there's no points in between here, so I can just hit the delete key. No. You definitely want to hit Control Delete. Control Delete. And now we could use the Insert Edge Loop tool, and we could basically insert, well, I need to go to the option box here, hit Reset for the Insert Edge Loop tool, and now we could just drop an edge wherever we want it. It's kind of hard to see that. I should darken this. Okay, so let's darken this. Let's go back to Object. Let's turn off that Preserve UV thing. Select it in Object mode. Let's delete the history. We've done some stuff to it. Delete all by type history. There we go. Go back to the surface. And here I can control the out transparency. So I'm going to crank that up all the way. And then I'm going to go to hit that little top button there. And then I'm going to go to the image editor window, scroll down, go to color balance, scroll down, and adjust the color gain right there. See? And I even have the option to tint it, right? So if I want this to be a slightly different color, I can do that and then just darken it or brighten it from there. And now when I bring in the object, it's very, very, very similar to what we had earlier. And of course, all those parameters would have to be keyframed if you use the same keyframing strategy we did earlier. So it's a little bit more of a setup, but the advantage is you have control over the material and you have control over the edges. And if this is something you deeply care about, then this is a good strategy. And I can adjust the out transparency here, which is the same as the alpha gain with the other setup, with the image plane setup. And then everything else is pretty much the same. Getting the feet on the ground, leveling out the skull so that they're exactly lining up, adjusting the x-axis, all those things are still going to be true. Making a layer, organizing it in the outliner, pretty much everything that you just learned, except now you're doing it with a polygon mesh and an image map. Oh, and one other thing, right? If you can't use Viewport 2.0 and you had to use the legacy default viewport, it might not display correctly. That's another downside. So it might not be able to display it. So if I just change out transparency down, see, it's really bad. So there's an option for this. It'll come back to me. Okay, I found it. It's right here under Preferences, Display. It was this number right here, this slider. Drag the baked viewport textures all the way up, and you'll get your maximum resolution and transparency when you're using Legacy Default Viewport or Legacy High Quality. And the downside to this is that when you change a parameter, you see how I've got the little circle there. So it's processing it. It's actually baking that texture. So make your adjustments and then stay with them. Otherwise, it's changing that real-time texture every single time, and it's slower because it's such a large resolution. So if you can use Viewport 2.0 with this method, it's pretty fast. I'm not waiting for anything. Whereas the others have to rebuild those textures, bake those textures every single time. Okay, that's about it in a nutshell. I'm going to use the first method of reference for creating this template mesh.